get so mad, there's no controlling me. My thoughts get so bad, I'm like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show.
I have to remain hopeful, because without hope, I am not working towards something. And so I choose to remain hopeful that things will change, but they can't change without a level of acknowledgement from the top.
Yeah, and I talk about collective responsibility a lot. It's on all of us, you know, what all of our backgrounds, whatever it is, to actually take that step forward and raise the understanding, because it can't just, you know, in some cases it will be unconscious. It won't be something that people realize that they're doing, and a lot of people would be quite mortified that they, you know, if you pointed it out to them, that they made you feel different or excluded or you know, whatever. But it's on all of us to contribute to that dialogue and have that conversation and share how you're feeling. So when something like that happens in the news, how comfortable are people having that conversation in the workplace, knowing that a member of staff might actually be deeply upset
by it
and impacted by it? Yeah, because there are times when I see things in the news and I feel like giving up. I'm like, it just, you know, what's the point?
Yeah.
And then something will trigger me to say, no, there is a point, and we have to, you know, we have to keep going.
To keep the hope. We have to keep the hope.
Have to keep going. I think I do think it's changing for our children. Our children don't, and I kind of blame my generation and older, maybe some a bit younger as well, for putting up with years of inaction, you know, and putting up with things by just keeping quiet because we were told to be quiet. Don't make a fuss, don't be quiet, this is how it is. You've just got to put up with it and
you just got to work twice as hard. Yeah, for the same benefit that they're getting.
And
I'm ashamed to say that I've had that conversation with my kids.
Yeah, I've had that conversation, and I but equally, it's really interesting. And I was talking about this to my boss, I think it was last year, it was a while ago, and we were talking about how our children describe when they're watching football. So watching a football match and describing a player by not saying the black player, but saying the one who's wearing purple boots or the one who's number whatever. I hear that in our children, and my boss and I were comparing notes that that's how our children describe describe players. They don't describe, you know. So to your hope, yes, although I have been known to say hope isn't real because it's, you know, you can't actually touch it. So it's what does hope look like? No one knows. But I do have hope. I do have hope that it will be different in years to come and people will be more aware. But then when you've got a Secretary of State who says publicly multiculturalism isn't working, it's like everything that the small people are doing, everything, these conversations that we're having on whatever level, and I really believe in ripple effect, that it doesn't matter if 2 people are listening to you or 2 million people are listening, it doesn't matter. Unfortunately, she has a platform, our Home Secretary has a platform where millions will listen to that and say, oh, okay, multiculturalism isn't working. It's the people who are non-white who are the problem here. She's just reinforced that being a woman of color, so being a woman and of color, astounds me. It astounds me, and I don't want to get political, but just that messaging, and the lack of pride in what you've achieved and what your parents achieved to get here, or what you achieved to get here.
Their dream. How can you be living your parents' dream, but then say that someone else doesn't have the right to have that same dream?
I know.
How is that possible?
And then when you look at, you know, there are elements that, so a lot of my friends are still teachers and tell me about how many because that was my background, how much funding has been cut for refugees to actually, so to get that assimilation, and language classes, they can't access language classes because funding's been pulled. Those courses have been pulled. So how do you want people to assimilate and feel valued when the messaging you're giving is you're not welcome?
Correct. You're not giving them the tools to do.
And yeah, honestly, I feel embarrassed that these are people of color who are speaking that way.
And sometimes you wonder why. I mean, you look across the spectrum, specifically the UK and the US, and it's really those people who are multicultural, who are minorities, who were immigrants, who are taking such a hard line on immigration, on views of racism, whether it exists or not.
Yeah.
But I think the importance, one of the important things that we need to focus on is, you know, when people associate the word racism with a country or a person, they have this vile picture of a monster raging or coming for you. And actually, racism presents itself in the subtlest of ways through microaggressions, systemic racism, and other things that are happening. But it's the perception of what this racist looks like that people have this visceral rejection of whenever they are associated with that word.
What can we do in the workplace to open up these conversations? How do we make our feelings known? What's a constructive way to do that?
I think like I can only speak to our example, but I think we need to start the awareness, racism awareness at work, so that people are aware, so that you can have that conversation with yourself and do the necessary learning to understand your biases, to understand words, to understand the impact of words, but also to understand how wordly events could impact you and your team and your company. And I really would like, I think there's been so much damage in terms of the corporate world when we had the report by Trevor, what was his name?
I know the one you mean. I can't think of the name.
And
about institutional racism.
About institutional racism.
Or lack of.
And you say to yourself, well, hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on. How is it that you've had so many examples of systemic racism that we can, as a country, hold to account that, you know, we've done a white paper, and it's come back with, you know, the UK is not a racist country. There are no racist institutions in the UK. And I think it does two things. It makes people unafraid to come forward and say, this has been my experience. It invalidates their experience. Maybe I was dreaming it. Maybe I did dream it. Maybe I, you know.
Yeah, maybe I'm overreacting. Or
maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm being emotional. Maybe I just wasn't in the right headspace to understand what that person was saying to me. Maybe I took it wrong. I think when people do not feel listened and heard, they did like our parents before us did, right? This will happen, but you don't worry. you get your boots on and you go out there and you work as hard as you possibly can, we push it down to the point where we're unable to actually have open and honest conversations about these things.
Yeah.
Where we're so far down that we can't even unpack. We don't see it wrong because we've been doing it for such a long time. We've been pushing down that trauma for such a long time that we don't even know it exists, that it is there, or how even to unpick it. But I think
yeah, I think that you're absolutely right, because I know it's taken me many years to unpack some things, that because you let it slide, and you go along with it because you want to be accepted and you want to be popular and you want to be liked. Okay, that's a human, whatever your background, all humans want to be liked and they don't want to be disliked. And that's just how we are if you've got a pulse. And I know there are people out there who don't care if people like them or not. And I think I'm fast reaching that point where I kind of think my dignity is more important than whether you like me or not.
Yeah.
And standing up for people who are being discriminated against has become a real passion of mine. It annoys me to my core that people get away with treating fellow humans before anything else in sometimes quite abhorrent ways. And it doesn't matter, and I don't need to name names or organizations, and I know we've touched on the police and this incident that's gone into the court and it's in the public domain, but we can't finger point to one institution. We've got to look at humankind. It's a humankind issue. Wherever there are people, that capacity to be kind or not is there. And it feels so much nicer to be nice.
It is. It takes
so much easier,
less energy.
So I asked my children a while ago, in terms of the playground and growing up, what words would you use if you wanted to be rude, or you wanted to swear about somebody who was not of colour, somebody who's white? And they couldn't come up with a name. And they really struggled, and they said we might say, and there were generic words that came up, I'm not going to swear on here necessarily, but isn't an equivalent, whereas I've grown up with the P word all my life. And some of my friends who are Indian, Sri Lankan, that subcontinent, they've grown up with the P word and they're not even from of that origin. Obviously the Black community have grown up with the N word, and I know the get out of jail card is always, Black artists use it in rap and use it in whatever, and they use it with each other. And yes, context is definitely important, but I couldn't work out why our children don't have a word back. Why my children not got, not that I was encouraging them to find one or go on some whatever. And I know there are some words that exist now that are just as damaging, but it's a lot less. And the connotations are, the whole thing about, I grew up with the gollywog toy, and that hit the news in this last year with the pub that had all the and it's just, at what point do we say, okay, enough, and let's learn and move on? And I'm not saying eradicate the past. I'm not. It's important not to eradicate the past.
Exactly.
But it's about acknowledging what is going on in the world and how it makes your fellow humans feel. And I think on a society front, if we can get it right in our workplaces, maybe that trickles out into our social lives and into our communities and all of that.
I think that That would be absolutely fantastic. I mean, we spend most of our time at work. And so if we can engage with people on that human level and raise awareness and build understanding around the issues of racism at work, like there's no reason why it cannot then have a domino effect into, you know, your home, your community, your school life, your extended family life. Yeah, I think it's really important to really set the standard at work, so that people know what you stand for, what your values are. I think that's important for a company, but it's also important for the individual as well. Why would I want to associate myself with a company that is not aligned to the eradication of racism in the workplace?
Yeah. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think it's time that we call companies out.
And how do we break those stereotypes that exist? You know, and I'll give you a real example. I remember somebody saying to me, and admittedly, this was a long time ago, more than 10 years ago. So I'm hoping the world is different. But I remember her saying to me about you don't want to employ a Black person because they'll be lazy and they won't work hard, you know, as part of the recruitment process. And I just remember just not having an answer for that, just being so stunned that someone felt able to even say that out loud. And it still astounds me to this day. And they said it with this authority of, you know, as if they had observed it, as if they'd done some kind of massive research and, you know,
Scientifically proven.
Yeah, that, you know, because no other ethnic minority could be, you know, because it was very specific about Black people. So somebody else can't be lazy. I have my lazy days. I know plenty of people of all sorts of colors and backgrounds that are lazy. That's just a human trait. That's not
It's just a human trait.
it's
Nothing
not
to do with
part of your
race.
cultural identity. I don't think last time I looked. How do we deal with that? How do we promote positive role models and negate some of those stereotypes?
I think through training. It's providing that safe space where people can raise awareness, where that awareness or that shared experiences with understanding of that awareness is mandatory. And where there is constant checkup following in with those people managers to ensure that they do understand their biases, because we all have biases, and that we're checking in with them and we understand the impact of that. But also create a standard for our recruitment intake so that we remove a certain element that is subjective, and we standardize that whole recruitment process in terms of what it looks and feels like. Just like how there was the whole agent thing, you could no longer put your age on a CV. It's something along those lines where I think more and more, I think before there was that awareness of, you know, if my name said XYZ, I know that the instances of me being called for the interview are going to be reversed. But I think now I'm seeing a reverse of that. I'm seeing people showing pride in their name, having a reluctance to shorten their name to appease people. And so I think there's a certain level of boldness and pride that people are having, And we're seeing that coming back into the workplace. And I'm just hoping that other recruitment departments like my own, well, that other recruitment departments can be reflective of my own in terms of how we have really standardized that process and how we are really investing in more people managers, to make sure that there is that level of awareness, that there is that level of training, and that it's not just the in and out, but it's also, there's also an emphasis of making that top down as well.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up